Go.
So some of the tips that I have for making an engineering notebook is, first of all, to mark specific pages for the judges to look at. As you can see, these two binders are massive, and I don't want the judges to have to flip through all of those and look at all those pages. And honestly, they won't. They won't look at every single page if you don't give them something to look at. So in the engineering notebook rubric, it actually says to mark pages for the Think Award, but I've gone ahead and marked pages for every single one of them. So as you can see, the cover page right here in this first one has each award with a color of tab next to it. And then if you go to the top right here, it has those tabs that coordinate to the awards. Then it has the pages listed right there. So that's a really good way to narrow it down. And don't overwhelm them with that too, because you can just do 10 pages for each award. And that's a really good way to narrow it down, to show that you know how to be specific with your documentation. It's not just you have this stuff all spread out, but you have specific pages that point to special moments in your design process, special things that you've done, and really important things that you want them to see. Next, always think about how to make your documentation like how notebooks are done in industry. So one of the things that I've done this year to make our notebook more up to industry standards, or how actual engineers would do it, is with our bill of materials. And this is just a smaller copy that's in the notebook, but I've got another copy of it right here. Is with our bill of materials, we also added a part numbering system. And so that allows the bill of materials to be really specific, documented really well, easy to organize, easy to look at all that stuff. And I'm happy to send this file to anybody that wants to look at it. It's kind of hard to look at right now. But the bill of materials is really important to show how much it costs, where you're getting your parts, and showing that, especially if you're building a custom robot, how you're doing it, so that the design process matches up with where you're getting all these things and how you're using them in different components on your robot. And the part numbering system is kind of a unique thing. Not a lot of teams are going to do it, and we actually learned how to do it from an FRC team, 254, the Cheesy Boofs. They started doing it, and we learned how to do it from them. And it's a really great way to organize your notebook with the actual builders by going in and renaming all the CAD files to the coordinating part number. And so it makes it really easy to organize the CAD drawings in the notebook, as well as the bill of materials, and make everything kind of match up and make the process really flow together. So that's one really unique way to make it like industry standards. Another way to make your notebook unique is to put lots of handwritten documentation in the binders. So actually, one time we had a team member draw out a robot change on a napkin at a restaurant. And I took that napkin, put it on a piece of paper, and slid it in the notebook. Because all that stuff just shows the judges how genuine your design process is, and you're showing them that you aren't just coming to practice, working on a robot. You're actually like thinking about it all the time. You're working on it. You're finding unique ways to improve it just when inspiration strikes. And so that's a really good way to show, and not only that, but also sketches you make at practice in the brainstorming process. Because yes, the CAD and all that stuff is important, but at the end of the day, it can come down to those beginning stages as you start to work on your problem. Also think about the fact that you're telling a story about your team, your season, and your robot. So make the notebook as accurate and as interesting as it can be. Don't make it just a collection of words that talk about your robot. Fill it with pictures, fill it with your team colors, find a way to brand it unique to you. And then just have fun with it, because if you don't, then it's not gonna be fun. It's a lot of work, and if you don't make it accurate and interesting for you to work on, then no one's really gonna enjoy it, and no one's really gonna want to read it. So make it a story. Think about where you started, where you ended up, but to make sure and tell all the middle parts. So also think about, like I said earlier, could someone take your notebook and duplicate all the work you've done, but also the experience that you've had? So talk about, like, when we're working on this, we were frustrated because of this. Talk about all those struggles that you went through. Don't just say, we had this and now we have this. Talk about some of that process, and then how your team was feeling and how you worked through that specifically. Who worked on it together? Did you divide up into 3 of us are going to tackle it this way, 3 of us are going to tackle it this way? Talk about all those specific ways so that someone can understand your experience and make it feel really personal. And then come up with unique ways to share some of the material outside of the notebook. I think this is really important, especially at competition and especially when you get to Worlds, when there are tons of judges, tons of teams, several days to go through all this stuff, because once you give them the notebooks in the judging room, you don't have them anymore in the pit. So some of the things that we've done to be able to share some of the information in the notebook in the pit is, one, with this smaller bill of materials to talk about that part numbering system, because that's really unique. And also to find important documentation in there and print it off. Make some way to tell the judges in the pit. So this right here is one example. This is our season outreach data. And so this documents the numbers for the 2018-2019 season, all of the outreach that we did, the teams we impacted, the students, the participating team members, the hours, the man hours, all this stuff. And so this was in the notebook, but we didn't really have a good way to point to it after we handed the notebooks over to the judges, and any way to prove that this was documentation and we weren't just standing there in the pit spouting off numbers. So this is a really good way to show that documentation of how breaking down each event and showing that, and then it's a really good way to come up with some totals of the far-reaching impact that your team has had. So that was another one. And then also, I don't have one over here with me, but we made a little binder, a small one we called it our judges book, that just kind of had some general summaries of all of these areas that talked about just a one-page description of our programming. And so it's kind of reflects what you're going to talk about in your presentation sometimes. But it's just hitting those highlights and then putting pictures in there too, so that you have access to pictures in your pit, and good ways to talk about what you've got in the notebook, and even using that to refer back to your notebook so that they'll go say, oh yeah, I wanted to check and make sure they have this in their notebook. So have it backed up in the notebook too is really, really good. And yeah, these two binders that I've got our engineering notebooks in are massive, and it's a lot of content, and that can be really good sometimes, but only if it's actually useful to the story. So don't just throw pages in there that talk about random things that have happened unless they're relevant to your design process. You can put cool things in there like, this is how our team bonded, we had a team Christmas party, we did this together. That stuff is good to tell your story, but don't drag it out. Don't make it this long process, because they won't get to look at all of it, and it'll just be overwhelming, and they won't get to see the good information if it's clouded with all of this fluff. So another thing is having a really good template and a consistent process for your daily logs. I found that a lot of times, like going back and making sections in the notebook like calculations, electrical, design, are only possible because I can go back and look at the meeting logs that I made when we actually had practice. So if that means that you do it every day right after practice, you get it done. If that means that you do it the next practice, you work on the one from before. If you do all of them from the week on Saturday, something like that. Having a really good consistent process for keeping up with the daily logs is great, and then taking notes at practice and stuff like that. Having a good template is really important, because you never realize how much those daily logs matter and how much you rely on them until you don't have them. So that's just some of my tips for how to do an engineering notebook. I am always happy to send any examples of the way I've done things in our notebook, if it's that bill materials or any other sections, or answer any other questions about how to do the notebook, whether they're specific or just kind of general. You can always email me at atomicgears10641@gmail.com and ask any questions, or follow our team on Twitter at FTC10641 and ask questions on there. So thanks.